r/AskReddit. Employers and managers who had to fire someone on their first day. What happened? 40-something-year-old woman came in smelling of alcohol in a toys store for her first day as a seasonal employee. She threw up on herself in between helping customers. Better than throwing up on customers while helping herself, I guess. Wasn't a manager, but we had a kid who came into the shop and his first day of night shift they couldn't find him. Well, they found him after a few hours. He cleaned off a shelf in the parts room and was sleeping on it. I had a buddy who did exactly this while he was part-time worker doing inventory checking in a big cash and carry. In the beginning of his job he guesstimated amount of items, climbed highest rack, they went really high, maybe 10 meters, smoked a joint, ate a shitload of potato chips that were on the top shelf and went to sleep. The only difference? He never got caught. They paid a mofo for getting high, stealing chips and sleeping. He showed a relatively flat-chested girl in the office the results of his wife's breast augmentation on his phone and gave her the contact details of the plastic surgeon. I worked at a drugstore. They hired some girl and on her first day behind the counter alone she spent 20 minutes scratching unpurchased lotto tickets and throwing away any losers until the manager saw what she was doing on the security camera and booted her. I worked at a large housing and counseling center for delinquent teenage boys. Usually about half of each new group of people hired didn't last more than a couple of weeks. They hired in waves and give them 2 weeks of training before they have them do much on the job work. However, the employee that topped them all was arrested during his first day of training. He was a vet, with good references, seemed level-headed, etc. Great hire, except, during a training lecture, a bunch of ATF guys showed up and arrested him for selling lots of explosives and restricted weapons without a license or documentation. I worked at an upscale cocktail lounge as a bartender. One day my boss hired this new guy to work behind the bar with us. It was rush and the bar was packed and we were all running around. Then this new guy comes up to the sink behind the bar, kneels down, puts his hair under the running faucet and then flings his head back leaving a splatter on the wall behind him. He then proceeds to smooth his hair down, at rush, in front of customers. He didn't stay long. My old manager, matron at a psychiatric secure hospital, told me of a guy who was employed as a healthcare assistant, working with people with a learning disability. Part of his role involved escorting patients into the community to help them with shopping. He took his first charge to a shopping center and proceeded to spend £250 on their debit card buying electronic goods for himself, which he then brought back to the hospital and asked for them to be stored in the staff room until the end of his shift. He left with the police. He asked my boss out. She said she is married. He then asked her if she is up for casual sex. Hired a girl to fire watch, which is where you literally sit still and make sure nothing sets fire while someone welds. Easiest job in the world. How do you duck it up? This girl gets 5 minutes into her first job, lays down on the ground, and goes to sleep. Not like she dozed off. She rolled up her jacket as a pillow and everything. On the ground, in the dirt, in the middle of our mill. Know someone who works at a warehouse that stores and ships boxes of pharmaceuticals. There are some understandably pretty tight handling rules so nothing goes missing and everything is stored properly. One day they had a guy start that asked if they should open the oxy to count them to make sure that there was as many in the bottle as it said there was. He asked multiple people this, was gone shortly after. IT position. Supposedly had a BA in computer science with 2 years experience in relevant technical position. I didn't interview him. We very quickly discovered that his computer abilities were non-existent. Started asking questions until he broke down and said he lied on his resume because he wanted to make more money. His previous job was drywall installation. We gave him a list of software he needed, available via URL. He didn't know what to do with a URL or what a URL was and then it quickly unraveled. It was about 3 hours because the first 2 were paperwork. I work for a company that takes care of the HR needs of other small companies in my area. New hires often come in to fill out paperwork. We had this guy who came in, filled out his name and social security number, gave it to us, then proceeded to steal the front desk guy's wallet and keys, right in front of the very visible security camera. Turns out the police knew the guy as he was a repeat offender. He lived right around the corner. I had to fire someone while we were doing their new hire paperwork. The store manager interviewed him, then sent him to me, ops manager, to do their papers. This kid starts majorly trash talking the store manager, other employees, asking if any fine bitches work at the door. He then goes on to say, "Man, are you seriously having me fill out all this paperwork? You're about as retarded as the store manager." I said, "Well, let's hold off on the paperwork then. I think we are going to go in a different direction with you, as you obviously are too professional for our business." It took him a second, but he then started acting like Eminem and shit talked the whole way out. See ya. I didn't fire this guy personally, but I did one better. I arrested him. I'm a police officer in the UK. I was forced to help on a recruitment event in our headquarters where applicants turned up, listened to a talk and did a few exams. Almost all wore suits or shirts and ties, except one. One was wearing a black polo shirt, black combat trousers and tactical boots. Weird and a bad impression, but whatever. Whilst they do the exam, I went into the yard for a smoke. All the applicants had to park in a certain area, which was just by the smoking shelter. One car stood out. It looked just like our unmarked cars. Exactly like our unmarkeds. I was a little confused, so I had a closer look at it. It had radiator lights and on the backseat was a police issue stab vest. I thought that it must be one of our cars parked in the wrong place. It happens. After the exam they left. I watched them leave and lo and behold, polo shirt man gets in the unmarked car. Immediately I jump in a real unmarked and take off after him. I found him 2 streets away putting blue lights on and driving through a red light. I overtook him, put my lights on and blocked him. He gets out waving a fake warrant card telling me he was en route to an emergency. Arrested for impersonating a police officer. He was also suspected of doing the same in about 3 other forces. Did a Tarzan swing on a overhead hoist remote cable going some 20 feet before the cable tore out. It only took maintenance 20 minutes to fix, but he was gone by then. Caught him snorting some kind of pill. He probably could have gotten away with it if he wasn't doing it in my office. My chef hired a guy who was less than a week out of prison for dealing. He was just going to wash dishes. Seemed like an okay guy, just looking for some work because he had just done 5+ years. So, day 1, he goes to head chef and asks, "Hey man, you know anybody here who wants to buy heroin?" Out the door 2 hours into his first job out of the joint. He tried to buy weed off a customer just because the customer looked like someone who might have weed. He didn't. Not first day but close. We have a very competitive college intern program where I work. So, young guy comes in and proceeds to sleep, and I mean head back, mouth agape, for half the day. I work in an open office, but he was in a weird corner where you couldn't really see him unless you were looking specifically at his area. So, those of us around him were stunned and not sure what to do. Day 2, he does the same. Day 3, same thing. Only this time a higher level manager came by to chat with me. He literally stopped mid-sentence when he glanced over and saw Sleepy. "Seriously?" was all he said. He apologized and said he had to have a talk with HR. Dude was gone within 20 minutes. I hired someone to write about cars for a website I was editing. Saw some of their work. They seemed eager and well educated. I thought it would be a good fit. The very first piece of copy he turned in on his very first day was a plagiarized copy of something I had written 2 years prior. I just sent him a link to my original piece that he plagiarized and never heard from him again. Not an employer or manager, but a girl at my job showed up absolutely plastered on her first day of work, working at a machine shop. I'm sure you can imagine that this was especially a no-no. I still wonder why anyone would show up drunk on their first day of work. Nerves maybe? The job hours were from 8 AM to 4:30 PM, Monday through Friday. Our new hire showed up about 10 minutes late on the first day. Normally 10 minutes late isn't that big a deal to me, but it was his first day, and I had pulled 3 other staff members into our 8 AM meeting so we could discuss the training schedule with our new hire. So we are already in our meeting when the new guy walks in. He doesn't apologize for being late. He just sits down as I'm going over the training schedule for the week. After a few minutes of listening to us discuss what he's going to be doing for the rest of this week, he raises his hand and says, "Can we reschedule the afternoon sessions planned for today and tomorrow? I have to leave at 11 today and 12:30 tomorrow." This was the first time I was hearing about these plans. I asked the 3 staff supervisors to give me an opportunity to speak with the new guy alone for a few minutes. They leave the room. So I start talking to the guy about how he can't just change his schedule without running it by management first. As I'm talking to this guy, he gets a text. He looks down at his phone and puts his hand up, as if he were telling me, "I'll be with you right after I finish reading this text." As soon as he finished reading the text and looked back at me, I said, "This isn't going to work. Please make sure you take everything you brought with you and do not return. I'll have HR email you your separation papers." He seemed pretty shocked and asked what he did wrong, so I told him. He tried to explain himself, but I told him that it's best if he finds somewhere else to work. When I managed a lumber warehouse a couple years back, I kicked out a labor-ready temp guy out for taking a longer bathroom break than usual because he was shooting up heroin in there. Kid stuck his hand in the fryer after being rushed to the hospital. I knew he was too much of a liability and I had to let him go. I'm not a manager, but I had a potential co-worker who called in sick. I guess he didn't know that the manager didn't have to work through the evening and bumped into him at the movies. My boss told us this as he fired him the next day. Hired a new night audit worker. Her first night alone after training, she sat in the lobby and smoked weed all night, ignoring guests and saying she didn't work there, with her name tag on the front of her shirt, and watched murder mysteries on the giant TV in the lobby. 15 minutes before her shift was over, she just left the building without waiting for her replacement to show up. So there was no one in the building with over 150 guests upstairs. I saw this all on camera the next day and she showed up that night for her next shift. I stopped her at the door and told her to go home and not come back. She was perfectly fine during training, but she did mention that she was a stay-at-home mom her entire adult life, and when her husband lost his cushy job she had to work. I brushed it off as whatever since we all have to work at some point, but I didn't know her no ducks given attitude was that bad. Work at a used record store. While giving the guy the tour, he mentions how we underbelly our LPS and lets us know he's just going to use his employee discounts to resell all the good stuff that comes in our eBay store. He lasted about an hour. New firefighter in my city. Had just finished 5 months academy. Graduated the night before. His whole family is there. The mayor, half the city council, and the fire chief pins his badge, and then he is assigned to a station. The rookie is told to report to the police department the next morning for tactical driver training, obstacle course and skid pad. Dude shows up the next morning at the police department, an hour late, still drunk from all the celebrating from the night before. Not only fired, but arrested for DUI. That's the end of his firefighting career. So I'm not a manager or employer, but I do get copied on all the termination notice emails for the retail locations our company has, for some reason. For terms on the first day, there's a bunch of the expected didn't show up for training, got a different job, extremely late to training, etc. There was also fist fight with customer, drug use, violation of company policy, dude tried to steal merchandise, and arrested, though for what, I don't know. There's probably some other great ones, but none that come to mind at the moment. I worked at a popular teen college kid clothing store. I wasn't the manager, but I trained new hires. This one girl shopped at the store a lot and we were excited to hire her. She was let go because she was late, was caught trying on clothes instead of greeting, and apparently laughed when anyone asked for a size larger than a medium. Her family showed up at the end of her shift and tried to buy $2,000, $3,000 worth of clothes with her employee discount. Corporate policy sucks, so they got a good portion of it. Her mom tried to bring it all back years later, completely worn, destroyed, and threw a fit saying she should get full price because the girl had died. Guess who we could all see sitting in her mom's car? Edit 1. Added a word for clarity, edit 2, because a lot of you are asking. The store is American Eagle. I was working as a waiter in a fancy restaurant. This classy guy shows up, well dressed, well mannered, looking for a job as a cook. They needed help back in the kitchen. So they hired him on the spot. Next morning he shows up, drunk as duck. Not in a had a super night out with the buddies. I'm still a little hungover kind of way, but more in a just downed a bottle of whiskey for breakfast kind of way. He had watery eyes, awful breath. He stuttered, struggled to walk straight but somehow managed to keep his head high. So management said duck it, put him to work. The very first thing he does is grab a big prawn and manages to ducking stab his own finger with it, right under the nail. Lots of blood and pain. Everybody is dumbfounded by this prowess. They immediately sent him home, maybe 10 minutes after he started his new job. I saw someone fired on their second day. They were hired as an admin document controller. They were functionally computer illiterate. It took them half an hour to copy a file to a flash drive. Half an hour. Not first day, but I had to fire a delivery driver because she couldn't drive. Had a license, just couldn't drive a vehicle safely to save her life. Scared one of my other drivers, another manager, and finally was recommended to me that I do a ride along to ensure they weren't out of their minds. Nope, she was a horrible driver. 2-lane road. Spent most of the time with wheels over the fog line because she was afraid of cars coming her way. Needless to say, I now ask prospective delivery drivers if they can drive well. Bro, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.